Hey, Mbula, Mbula, everyone. Ni Mbula Vinaka. Hope you can hear me clearly. Okay. Oh, okay. Hope you can. Nisambula, aloha, malolele, talofalava, kiorana. Warm Pacific greetings to you all, our dear friends, wherever you are logging in from right now. Uh, would like to take this opportunity to welcome you all for this special International Women's Day Talanoa series that I've put together for this week. We kickstarted these sessions on women's Talanoa from yesterday. We went to the island of Rotuma, acknowledging Fesaitu Solomone for gracing this space last night, saying bula to her. She will be listening in from Auckland in New Zealand. And today we'll be traveling across the ocean over to Fiji, where we will be listening to Dr. Frances Koya Vaka-uta. And I know many of you are familiar with her work in the region. I will give her the time to introduce herself to you. And I know many of her students from high school as well as students from USP who knew of her will be joining in as well today. So to await those who will be joining in later on, most of you know that I always play a song in the beginning of my Talanoa session to welcome everybody. Usually the song is a choice of my guest, or sometimes it's a joint decision. But this is a beautiful song that will connect Fiji and Samoa. And this is one of my favorite songs as well, particularly sung by the one and only George Fiji Vekoso. So I'm sure many of you will have this song very familiar to you all. So let me share the song, and I'm sure we'll all enjoy it. Yeah, so Nisambula Vinaka to all of you, and I hope you will enjoy this beautiful song, Sosefina, sung by George Fiji Vekoso. Nisambula Vinaka. Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful song by George Fiji Vekoso, and a beautiful song that many of us do love to listen to, and that's one of my favorites as well. And I heard from my Samoan friends that George Fiji Vekoso actually sings it better than the Samoans themselves, which is very, very amazing to hear. So, Bula Vinaka to George Fiji Vekoso, wherever you are listening in from Turanganeta, we are thinking of you tonight and thank you for your wonderful talent, especially of singing that beautiful song, Sosefina. So today, as you all know, this will be our second Talanoa session to commemorate this very special week that we are heading towards the International Women's Day to be celebrated on Saturday. So my plan was to lead up to the day. It would be great to invite, women who have inspired me personally in their line of work and the various hats that they wear. And so today we have Dr. Frances Koya Vaka-uta, who is joining us from Fiji. So we'll greet her right now. And she looks very radiant and beautiful as always. Bulavinaka and Talofa, Dr. Frances.
Well, Vinaka Tarisi, it's wonderful to be here. Bula to all of our viewers this evening. I'm going to spin things a little, and Tarisi, you know me very well. I like to spring things on you. And so before we begin, I'd like to take a minute just to acknowledge the wonderful work that you are doing on this platform, which has had such a tremendous impact on Itauke and Pacific families, not just in Fiji, but around the world. I know that your intention is this week to profile several women, as you have said, who have inspired you. But I think it would be remiss of us to not also acknowledge the powerhouse Marama that you are. And I want to take this opportunity on behalf of your viewers and everyone who have been inspired by the work that you do, your impact and your legacy, not just on this platform, but across your career. So in Fiji, in New Zealand, in Hawaii, and of course now the US. So yeah, before we begin, I really just wanted to say thank you for all that you have done and all that you do, and for the opportunity to Talanoa with you tonight.
Yes, nakabaliw Sarah, Dr. Francis. Thank you for those beautiful words. Yeah, and it's this types of platforms that are so empowering, yeah, on so many levels. And as we were discussing earlier on before we started the live session, most of the time we often see our friends, our colleagues, with the roles that they play in the professional, spaces, yeah, the work that they do. But then there's the human side of them behind that role, which I thought that, these types of Talanoa sessions that I run is the opportunity for us to hear that voice, yeah, hear that story that may not have had the opportunity for others to hear. So, Vinaka Dr. Frances, for those beautiful words. And for many of you who are watching, this International Women's Day, the theme is March Forward for All Women and Girls. And I think, from the work that I've been doing ever since I started my career at the Fiji Museum, have really highlighted to me personally the contribution that women can make, despite the gender differences and other inequalities that other people may face in their life. But I thought that many of the work that we do even surpasses our male counterpart, if I can say that. And this is kind of an opportunity for us to showcase the individuals that I've invited for this week, and so they can be able to share their stories, and their stories can empower all of our listeners who will be joining us. Eh? So, Dr. Frances, I know many, people, as I said earlier, know of you because of the various hats you've worn before. But maybe if you can start our Talanoa today by introducing yourself, starting first with your beautiful family. Just tell us your upbringing when you were a little princess many years ago up until now.
That's a bit of a loaded question. How long do you have? So many people know me for my Samoan heritage, but I haven't often shared my full lineage. So maybe this is an opportunity to do that. And I thought that, to use this platform to reach out also to those of mixed heritage, such as myself, often young girls and young people, boys as well, struggling to find their place and their sense of belonging. So I'm of mixed heritage. On my mother's side, my mum actually was born and raised in Samoa and came to Fiji as an adult. Um, her connections in Samoa to villages, Salemua and Nofoali'i. I have been very blessed to know my family, to connect with them. But she also has connections here in Fiji, lesser known connections, in Levuka and in Kandavu. I have to say, though, on my paternal side, it's very unfortunate that my father passed when I was very young. So I didn't have that opportunity to really get to know his side of the family. He passed away on my 10th birthday. So I've had a lot of trouble celebrating my birthday for that reason. But and after the coup, I think a lot of our Indo-Fijian community left. So I mean, technology has been wonderful because I've been able to reconnect with many of them. But sadly, I don't have their stories or that heritage. So on my paternal side, my father has family lineage to Kerala in India and to the Middle East. But as I said, little snippets of stories here and there of strong female figures along the way that have, well, enabled someone like me to survive and to do the things that I do. So, yeah, mixed upbringing. My home was a very multicultural home, multiple languages being spoken. Both my parents were fluent in Wasavakaviti, in Hindi, in Samoan. My dad also spoke Arabic and English. Unfortunately, by the time I came along, all my siblings were older than me and my cousins as well. And there was just myself and one cousin. And they did not necessarily do very well at school. So by the time I came along, the rules were very clear. There were three key pillars, I suppose, if you will. One was the church, very staunch Catholics, at least my mother was. And then we had culture. And then for me, there was education. So for her, it was like, you need to speak in English and do well at school. And I did, but looking back, I do have some regret that while I do understand basic Fijian, basic Samoan, very basic Hindi. Basically my first language is English, and it took me through education right through to the PhD, but what a cost um, it had. And maybe that's one of the reasons that I continue to do the work that I do to promote and encourage culture and language through education as well. Just acknowledging that our parents do the best that they can with the knowledge that they have in the moment. And in the moment, many of our Pacific parents still feel the same way, that English is a language of power. And, there are so many others like me, even in today's society, where kids are not encouraged to learn or become fluent in their languages. So after my dad died, my grandmother was still alive and my mom's sisters. So the culture of the home then was very, very Samoan. Um, and so that's kind of where the Samoan connection comes from and the strength of that. And as an adult, I kind of struggled with this sense of, where do I belong? Where do I fit in? But I think because of the cultural values that were instilled in the home around service, around leadership, around respect, humility, it kind of sets you on a path. To continuously pursue those engagements that will benefit others, whether it's your own family or the wider community. Yeah, my grandmother was really, really stern, tough love. I say I love you to my kids all the time. I never once heard that. I never once heard my mother say, I love you, those words out loud. I never once heard my grandmother say that. But I never once doubted that I was loved, because it wasn't in the words, it was in the demonstration, it was in the care that we received. So I really think that that kind of set the foundation for who I was to become later on in life. Um, yeah, of course, you know me, I'm a teacher like you. I can go on and on and on, but maybe I should stop there and see if you have any other probing questions you'd like to pose for me.
Yes, no, that's just wonderful that you shared your family lineage, Vinaka Vaka-levu. That's wonderful to also hear the Levuka and the Kandavu side. So that's really wonderful to hear. And also, the session that I was looking forward to today, especially with you, Dr. Frances, is the power of storytelling, the power of the stories themselves, and also the storytellers. And it's wonderful that you've highlighted the role of your grandmother and your mom and your aunties. Even though you've highlighted the presence of your dad until you were 10 years old, those the memories, yeah, that is there. I'm sure the stories are able to make those memories, yeah, continue, from when you were little up until now. And it's interesting, when you mention one of the three pillars, which is education. And I remember reading your thesis, and you had the focus on tatau, tatu, and tapa. What was the motivating reason behind you choosing those two art forms? Because, that was just, so important in our culture in the Pacific.
How much time do we have for this one? Jokes aside. Again, I think it goes back to the stories that were told. So, growing up at a time before TV, before smartphones, we had the radio, and the radio was for listening to the news. Unless you were doing some leisure activities, then the radio was turned on, right? If you had visitors, they might play a record or something, but that wasn't something that you did all the time. And so we'd turn the radio on and listen to the stories on Sunday night or on Tuesday night. But I was quite blessed to have my grandmother. And, in the time when my dad passed, it became a time of real struggle for my mom. When my dad was alive, so he was a policeman, and prior to his retirement, just before he passed, he was deputy superintendent. But for the longest time, Mr. Koya is known as one of the leading detectives in Fiji at the time, leading murder investigations, things like that. And with my mom, well, she was well known for her design, creativity, dressmaking, and at a time when people talked about, um, fashion designers back then, Mrs. Koya was up there on the list. So there was really this public perception that we were doing well. But when my dad passed, it became such a time of struggle that she didn't have the kind of time that a mother should have, because she was really trying to put food on the table and get us through school, etc. So my grandmother very quickly stepped in, and my mom's older sister, and my grandmother would practice fangongo, which is nighttime storytelling in the Samoan tradition. And it really is performative. So it's not just like reading a book or telling a story. The storyteller is a performer. So she would, there'd be narrative, but there'd be songs, she'd be dancing, she'd be chanting, and it was so mesmerizing. Um, so she would tell stories from our genealogy, she would tell cultural stories, and then she would tell us stories about the saints and how they died. So that was a bit traumatic. But lots and lots of the stories from a very young age, I think I realized that the stories were carefully selected to teach us lessons.
Mm.
And so it was like there was always a moral. It was like Aesop's fables. And so that was one of the first kind of awakenings for me, that, while the stories were a wonderful pastime as a child, you love those stories and you love listening to your grandmother sing you to sleep and that. But as you get older, you begin to recognize the layers in the stories too. So the stories you heard as a child, when you hear them again as an adult, you realize that there's a child-friendly version, and then there's an adult version where the lessons change or transition as appropriately. So I think from a very young age, I learned to love stories. Um, I wanted to be a writer. When I was in high school, and my grandmother lived in Vesari, but she'd come and visit all the time. And when she didn't visit, I begged my mom to let me go on the bus, on that shore buses, the blue one, all the way down to Vesari. And I'd get off the bus, with a little treat for her, whether it was cream bun or a cake my mom had baked or something, armed with my notebook and a pencil. And I would tell her, tell me that story again, the one you told me when I was little. And I'd write them down. So this is, as a teenager, I was already really keen.
Mm.
And my first real understanding of intellectual property and safeguarding the knowledge of the holders came from her, because she would say things like, okay, this story you can share with other people. And then there were times when she'd say, I'm going to tell you a story, but this story is only for our family. You shouldn't share it with. And so I then began to differentiate, okay, so there are filters, access, and slowly becoming aware of these distinctions. There was one day, and I think I write about it in the thesis. I think I capture it in the TEDx talk that I had done in 2016. But there was one day when she was visiting us at our home up in Suva, in Domain, and she came out of the shower and she said to me, Frances, you need to find a camera. We didn't have a camera. I mean, we were struggling, a camera at the time was a luxury, right? Not only did you need the camera, you needed the film, you needed money to develop it. You never knew how many would develop, or if your finger was over the lens, there's so many factors involved. And I said, oh, what for? And she said, well, I want you to take a picture, photos of my tattoo, my malu, which is the female tattoo on her thighs, because this tattoo was designed especially for me. And I can tell you the meaning of each of the designs. As a teenager, and I just kind of brushed it off, even though I was already documenting her stories, and I kind of brushed it off, and I was like, yeah, okay, but we don't have a camera, and kind of that was that. But over time, as my cultural awareness continued, and then, I was so close to her. She was so spiritual, very connected to the spirits, communing, and also very Catholic, rosary going every day kind of Catholic. Blue Army, all of that. Novenas on Monday, almost every day at church, Catholic. Um, but also, she'd say, listen to the nighttime, your dreams, the messages, listen to, because those are stories as well and messages. Um, so the thesis was kind of born out of that, born out of a desire to try and make sense of my own fragmented sense of self, because I had grown up thriving in formal education because I'd learned to embrace the English language and to play by the rules of academia. There are other brilliant Pacific Islanders who never learn how to juggle that space, unfortunately. And I became so aware, not just through my teaching in secondary school, but at uni, that the culture gap that exists in education is huge, incredibly huge. And there just isn't enough being done by our governments, our respective ministries of education, by higher education, and by researchers. And even though the research has told us what needs to change, we just simply haven't been able to harness that political will. So for the longest time, I kind of struggled. I mean, I evaded the PhD for probably 7 years. I did the master's in 2002, and the year after, I got called in officially by the head of school to be told, well, now you need to start thinking about the PhD. That's the next natural progression in academia. And I found creative ways to avoid doing the PhD, not because I was scared, but because I needed the topic to speak to me. And I found the topic in those stories. I realized that there's so much wisdom in our stories, whether it's in your children's songs, your lullabies, whether it's in your proverbs and idioms, the values of sustainability, of living in balance, quality of life, life philosophies, and just wanting to find the opportunity to allow our children to feel valued and to provide teachers as well with something tangible that they can use to improve the learning experience of our children. As you know, the failure rate continues to be extremely high in the region. And we still haven't joined the dots between a culture inclusive education and academic performance and excellence. So that's kind of where the PhD came from. And I think it was what was so empowering. And I know all doctors who have gone through the PhD journey say the same. In your journey to answer your research questions, it also becomes a journey of self-discovery. And you find yourself in that way. And I guess it kind of lights the path. I was, of course, very, very blessed to have Professor Konai Haluthaman, a wonderful mentor and friend, guide me as my supervisor. And for her, the supervisor sessions were not your strict in an office session. It was always over coffee and an informal Talanoa. And she really speaks from the source to say, what's your gut feeling? And follow that path, and I will help guide you along the way. So I've been really, really blessed to have some amazing women storytellers who have lit the various torches to help me find the way. And through that PhD journey, it was really funny because it was like, on the way you stumble and you think, oh, this is a tangent. This is not where I think I should be. But when you look back, you realize that they were all bringing you to the point that you needed to get to. So yeah, firm believer in being exactly where I need to be as a result of that. But very long-winded response to your question about the PhD. The PhD for me is so much more than just a certificate. It really is about trying to transform education and trying to create spaces for indigeneity and for cultural ways of knowing and learning in the classroom. We're not there yet, but while we still have life, we continue the fight, right?
Absolutely. We will get there. We will get there. No, Vinaka Vaka-uta for highlighting that. And I think that was something I felt when I was reading your work. And, thank you for acknowledging, your grandmother, and your mom and your aunties. And again, coming back to the power of storytelling. Yeah. Just when you were answering the question, I could visualize, the hands in weaving, your life's journey. So it wasn't by mistake, or it wasn't by chance that you ended up, doing that. And also acknowledging Professor Konahelu Thayman, being from Tonga, and knowing that, Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji, we have such a very close, history. So for you two to be working together was, I'm sure, not by mistake as well. So Vinaka Vaka-uta. So you've been talking about PhD and masters. Can we go a little bit,
Go
take a
back.
step back, to your primary school and secondary school? Where did you go, for those years of schooling?
So I mentioned before that my mother was hardcore Roman Catholic. Um, so it was critical that I and my siblings got a very strong Catholic education. So I went to Stella Maris Primary. I then did 4 years at St. Joseph's, and then I did my seventh form at Yatsen Secondary.
Hmm. Yeah, because I kind of remember pictures, of you wearing the Yetsen. I think I was talking to someone today, and I was like, "No, I think she went to Yetsen," and someone said, "No, she went to Saint Joseph." So now I confirm that. So Vinaka Vakalev. So Mula Vinaka to all the ex-scholars of Saint Joseph's, Stella Maris, and Yetsen. So Vinaka Vakalev, and I'm so blessed as well for those of you who are watching today that. Our paths crossed with Dr. Frances at USP. So while she was in St. Joseph's and Yetsen, I was in Nabua Secondary and Nandi Nakumbau, and we ended up at USP together. So here we are, having this wonderful Talanoa session and going back down memory lane. Vinaka Vakalevu, Dr. Francis, for sharing your upbringing, your stories, and your schooling as well. Now, coming to the International Women's Day, what was your thought, of this day, or what was the first time you heard of this particular celebration?
To tell you the truth, I think I first heard of this when I was at uni as a student.
Mm,
And if I'm completely honest, I have struggled, and a lot of my friends in the gender space know this. I've really struggled with the demarcation between men and women.
mhm,
Um, in my household, well, very matrilineal, very strong women. If anyone who's met a Samoan woman will know, she's the queen of the house, right? So that's kind of the upbringing that I had. But at the same time, you know, everyone had roles and responsibilities, and there was never any demarcation of privileging one gender over the other. So for the longest time, I really struggled with this idea of, I guess, elevating women and girls.
mhm,
I still do in some respect, but of course, becoming more aware of the violence that women experience, the disadvantage that women and girls face in many of our communities, acknowledging the importance of International Women's Day. Um, yeah, but I mean, I really feel like when we celebrate International Women's Day, there must be a
mhm,
component where we celebrate the men who helped nurture us to become the women that we are today. And I feel like when we take the Western narrative as the only narrative, we begin to segregate. And that's when it becomes problematic because it looks like and it feels like we're privileging women and girls over men and boys. Um, and when do we teach our sons and nurture them to be the men that we need them to be? You know, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my take on it. I do feel International Women's Day is so important. The mothers of wisdom, the mothers of the next generation. but also the mothers of sons. And I feel like when we talk about indigeneity, indigenous wisdom, and knowledge systems, that there's so much wisdom and richness there that has yet to be unpacked. So hopefully we'll get to see some of that.
Yes, Vinaka Bakalevu. Thanks for highlighting that. And I think even with aside to Solomon's interview yesterday, even though when I was asking question about her mom and her grandmother said, she kept referring to her dad.
Mm,
That was,
mm,
so beautiful. And thank you again for highlighting that. And to our fathers and husbands and brothers who are watching our Talanoa today and looking at all the celebrations this week, just know that
mm.
we also think of you. And you're absolutely right. There's always that hand that have helped us and helped our mothers, helped our grandmothers, years and years ago. So Vinaka Bakalevu, for highlighting that. And now, Francis, with many of your students who were acknowledging you on your poster while I shared it on social media. So, there was, oh, she was my teacher, she was my mentor at USP. So you wore different hats along the way. Can you share a little bit about your academic journey, after you left Yetsen? Where did you go after that?
When I left Yatsen, at the time, we didn't really have a proper careers education in school. I sincerely hope that this has improved
Mm.
because what our teachers got us to do in seventh form was apply for everything and wait to see what comes. So I ended up being accepted to FSM to do an MBBS, and I got a partial scholarship to go to Otago to do criminology because a part of me always regretted not being able to connect more deeply with my dad, and I wanted to follow in his footsteps. Of course, my mom said no to Otago. That was a partial. We didn't have the money, and she didn't want me to travel on my own. And I didn't really want to be a doctor, not that kind of doctor. So we decided together that I would go to USP. I was the first in my family to go to university. I mean, I have one uncle on my mom's side in the States who recently passed away, Uncle Alofa, who was a professor at university. But there was really, no one. So my cousins would ask me, like, why are you doing that? Aren't you tired? Get a job. But I went off to USP, no academic counseling whatsoever. I was told, do select the choices as your majors, the subjects you do well at school. So I rock up to register in biology and English, literature and language. And I get told, you can't actually do that across disciplines. 18-year-old me didn't know what a discipline was. I was frustrated and I said, okay, what else could I do? And then I was told, what's your next highest subject? And I said, well, I did accounting. Okay, there, do that. So I did 2 years of English, literature, and accounting. And in my third year, I had a good friend who was an accounting student say to me, like, girlfriend, what you gonna do when you leave school? And I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, English and accounting, that doesn't quite like help you get a job. It was only at that moment that it kind of dawned on me, oh my goodness, what am I gonna do? Um, Education was, I guess, an easy choice. I had very clear memories of teachers who were great, at least four wonderful, inspiring teachers. But I also had, you know, a ton of stories of horror stories of teachers who belittle students, who really crush their spirits at a very young age. So even then, I think it seemed quite a natural choice to say, okay. But mind you, this was towards the end of my second year at uni, when I finally started thinking about a career choice. I then moved on after graduating to Sila Central. Um, and it was only when I had complications with my pregnancy with the twins that I had to take a break. And then I started at St. Joseph's, and it was from St. Joseph's that I then migrated to USP, where I stayed for 23 years. before joining SPC in January of 2021.
And so the role that you play now, what is the department that you're part of at SPC, Dr. Frances?
I'm the team leader, Culture for Development. So I lead the Culture for Development program within the Human Rights and Social Development division at SPC.
And then, so I mean, if you look at it, culture, is still part of that journey. You telling your story of your upbringing, and do you still see the cultural upbringing and the family component of mom and your grandmother still kind of intertwined into the role that you play today?
Absolutely. I think in all of the work that I've done through higher education, training teachers, in the research, in the supervision, really trying to help students understand the connection between and the wealth of knowledge um, that culture brings to the table, how it can enrich our lives and empower young people. And it got to the point where I found myself straddling academia, the research, the supervision. My time is director at the Oceania Center, so the arts and culture. But I was also heavily involved in development work and wanting to get my hands dirty and work more with youth and work more with community. Um, and the change finally came when I realized, okay, well, look, I'm in my 40s now. If there was ever a window of opportunity to test the water, this might be it. And I feel like if I don't take this opportunity now, the window will close. But if I take the opportunity now and decide it's not for me, I can still come back to academia. Whereas if I leave it too late, then I probably won't have that opportunity to see what it feels like in the development space. Um, but absolutely, I mean, now in the policy space, just looking at different ways that we can recognize, acknowledge, and empower our people to feel validated and valued so that their experiences put front and center of the development agenda. And it's such a humbling and privileged position to be in, to know that in a small way, you're joining this long line of incredible people who have done amazing work, and you have the chance to add to that wealth of knowledge, and then pass on the baton to the next generation of either academics, researchers, or Pacific Islanders who come into the development space.
Vinaka Vaka-uta. And again, on behalf of all our listeners, yeah, just to acknowledge the amazing work you and your team, have been doing over the years. And I know there's going to be exciting work and projects in the future. So for those of you who are watching, she currently works at the Secretariat of the Pacific Community in the Suva office. And you also mentioned, policy, and I know you were part of was it the culture policy that was launched a few years ago? Would you just like to tell us the importance of that policy, Dr. Frances, for
So the
Fiji?
for Fiji, okay. So the Fiji National Culture Policy, it's the very first one for Fiji, um, through the Department of Heritage and the Arts. Um, it's so critical for us to ensure that our policies look like us and feel like us and sound like us, because for too long we have simply cut and paste and tried to fit a mold that we don't fit in. Um, and so the Fiji National Culture Policy, I think, is such a critical document, but a policy is only good as the words on the page.
Mm.
The proof of the pudding, if you will really come from government funding and investment, and working directly with communities. So a real decentralized approach to ensure that, different line ministries are working together. We're so used to this Western model of development that puts sectors into silos. And what the National Culture Policy tries to do, just like the Pacific Regional Culture Strategy at the regional level, is it tries to cut across that and recognize that regardless of what area you're talking about, culture is a cross-cutting priority in that space. What does that mean? What does that look like? Are there resources available to have these discussions? And how can we contribute to improving the quality of life for our people? So I guess one of the big tasks now is to focus on actual implementation, securing the resources to deliver on that, but also in quality and rigorous monitoring and evaluation so that we're capturing those stories, success stories, and allowing ourselves to have honest conversations about what hasn't worked. The biggest lessons, I think, come from our failures, but we have been taught shame. And because of that shame, we only want to talk about our success stories. So I think in order for this policy, or any policy really, to succeed, we need to devote enough time to unpack what actually happened, what went wrong, and what did we do really well. And only then can we see, the change we want to see. It's very exciting to see the work that's being led by the department, now, of course, situated in Ministry of Etoke Affairs. Incredible work that they're doing, incredibly difficult work that they're doing, but also very promising, I think.
That is wonderful, and congratulations, to you and your team, because I know it wasn't easy. It took a lot of consultation on so many levels. So it's there now, eh?
It
And
took
I'm sure
11
that,
years.
wow, 11 years.
It took
Wow,
11 years.
to get there.
I
Mm.
started the engagement on the National Culture Policy in 2012, when Elise Haffa was the culture advisor at SPC. And I believe that was an EU-funded project. But because of differing political views and political correctness around ethnicity, about race, about what you could talk about and what you couldn't, some people felt that when you talk about indigeneity, it becomes racist and exclusive. And I think
Mm-hmm.
in those 10 years, we've matured as a society. Um, to the point that enough of us recognize that by privileging and prioritizing Indigenous voices does not take away from the authenticity, the validity, the uniqueness of the diversity of other cultures. Um, and I think we've finally matured to the point that we recognize actually this is not as controversial as maybe we thought it was 10 years ago. So I think it's a testimony to our journey as a nation as well.
That is wonderful. And when you were working on that cultural policy for Fiji, because there was the regional strategy that was also being created, was it going on simultaneously, or was it overlapping at some point?
So
Were you part of that
the
too for the regional strategy?
Yes, yes, I was part of the regional strategy as well.
Sandina. So did the regional inform the national or vice versa? Or did they complement each other in any way?
Yeah, I think they complement each other, definitely. Yeah, definitely.
That is wonderful. And I'm sure Mr. Cipriano Nemani will
Yes.
listen to our Talanoa at some point, and also want to acknowledge him as well. And I'm sure there are other special individuals, who are part of it too, Dr. Elise Haffa and others who contributed to that. So big congratulations.
Mm,
And I remember talking to Mr. CP I think a week or two ago. He was explaining to us the importance of policies. Yeah, he was saying that the policies kind of connects to the legislations
mhm.
that enables different ministries to do what they have to do with government support and funding that comes with it. So it goes hand in hand with what you've just said. So wow, a lot
Absolutely.
of work.
Yes.
11 years, Santin.
I do want to acknowledge the former director, Colin Yambaki, who ironically was also a former student of mine, teacher ed at USP. But really, when Colin came in as director, he called me in because there was a lapse in conversation. He called me in and he said, "Madam," he calls me Madam, Madam, what happened? And I said, well, culture is politics. It's a political space, and we need some clear directive on what are the parameters for this policy, and then we can progress. And he was adamant that this needed to happen. So, I mean, I just want to acknowledge that he really was a driving force to ensure that we completed it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Mr. Colin Mbaki, again, if you're listening to our Talanoa, uh, later on, a big Vinaka Vaka-levu, for your vision and, the ability to keep pushing, yeah, keep pushing. And even though it took 11 years, you did it. So Vinaka Vaka-levu for that. So now, Dr. Frances, we're coming closer to the end of our Talanoa. And I know there's a lot of young girls and women who are also watching our Talanoa. What advice, would you give them in terms of, thinking of the theme of this year's International Women's Day?
So I have a request. I do have a response to your question, but then I also have a poem I'd like to dedicate to
Yes.
all the women out there. So I guess my advice to mothers and to young women out there, um, regardless of your cultural background, whether you have a strong indigenous or cultural upbringing, whether you are mixed race and you're questioning, um, my advice would be that if your mothers and your grandmothers, your aunts, the women in your family are still alive, we need to learn how to acknowledge them as women and not just in those relational roles, and to take the time to sit with them. And I think this is the biggest challenge for us as mothers, to find the time to sit with our daughters, and as opposed to instructing them and giving them rules and guidelines, to simply share our stories of resilience, of struggle, of survival, and of agency, not just of our women's stories, but our men's stories as well. I think that too many of us have only stories of women's struggle, um, of service, of leadership, and of sacrifice. And many of our daughters grow up thinking, well, that's it. This is basically a woman's lot, it becomes normalized. And so we really need to break that mold, so that our daughters are free to make the choices that they would like to make, so that they can explore their interests and their gifts and their talents. But also for our sons, so that our sons become the champions that their sisters and cousins and neighbors need. Um, I really believe that working together, we can make a real difference. I do also have a second piece of advice from my grandmother. My grandmother, I remember, sat us down when I was very young to say, even if you're a chief here and here, when the cock crows in our village, you can't hear it in the next one. So remember where you are celebrated and have elevation. Humility is important. You don't tell people who you are, your behavior will tell them where you come from.
Mm.
Words have power and words are magic. You either bless or you curse, so watch your words. And I feel like in the digital space, the seduction of anonymity, we see cyberbullying, we see all kinds of sexual violence, sometimes leading to suicide, leading to so many social ills that those of us who are of the older generation don't really understand, and therefore can't help the younger generation deal with. I feel like there is still power and resilience to be learned, the wisdom to be learned from those stories. So I do encourage the mothers out there, the fathers out there, to tell your children your stories, because they grow up way too fast, as I have learned. And we get so busy with life and the things that at the end of the day don't really matter.
Vinaka Vaka-levu, Dr. Frances, for those beautiful words of wisdom. And yeah, we look forward to hear your poem.
So my poem, if I remember correctly, was written around the time that my mom passed away. And I was reflecting on the role of stories and the lasting legacy of stories. And it's called The Mothers of Wisdom. Words of wisdom fall like tears into open shells and ears as the women gather to thread dreams into stories of love. Words of wisdom curve like songs that glide on wings of mulberry, weaving words and silences into stones that sing, that will remain till there's nothing but sea and sky. Words of wisdom swim like fish into darkness and lightness, in grief and in joy, condensing on the palate, cemented into memory. Words of wisdom fall like tears, curve like songs, swim like fish as the women gather to thread dreams, words, and silences into stories and stones of love that will sing, condensing on the palate, cemented into memory born when there's nothing left, just sea and sky. Oh, happy Women's Day to all the women out there and to you, you amazing powerhouse woman. And thank you for having me on the show. It's been a privilege to Talanoa with you today.
Vinaka Dr. Frances, thank you for sharing your journey. Bringing in your beautiful mom and your grandmother and your uh, aunties, and I'm sure your daughters as well, included in this Talanoa. And yeah, I was just so happy when you agreed to my humble request. And when you agreed to it, I knew that is going to be a wonderful Talanoa session that is very powerful. We looked at the power of stories, the power of storytelling, and the power of storytellers. And I'm sure I was asking you the word tusitala when we about to start. And again, those beautiful words such as talanoa, it's a word that connects Tonga, Samoa, and Fiji. And again, there's so much, of these stories that needs to be recorded and shared, and you did just that today. So on behalf of all of us, and I know this, I can see Jess Nanga watching Bulvidaka Kai. Bulvidaka Turanganeta, Chanibatiwale. Thank you to those of you who are joining in, connecting in from Dubai as well. So thank you everybody, Safaira Ogden, and Master John Ravisa from the United Emirates. Yeah, so thank you to everybody for spending the time with me and Dr. Frances. And again, Dr. Frances, we wish you all the very best this week, and I'm sure you all be doing different activities in Fiji. And I will have other ladies who will be joining me the remaining days of this week, including Baka Books as well, a group of women who put together this beautiful bookshop down at McGregor Road, and the Vein Gear Project as well, and a few other ladies that I've shared their posters to. So, Dr. Frances, from all of us who are watching today, all the very best with all the work you'll be doing this year. With your work at SPC, and Vinaka for all that you do, and Lolomba to the family.
Thank you so much. Take good care and we'll talk again soon.
Yes, Vinaka Vakaleu. Wata kabanda. Vinaka. Yes.
God
Thank
bless.
you. Vinaka Vakaleu, Sarah. Dr. Frances, to our wonderful listeners, what a wonderful opportunity that we've just had speaking to Dr. Frances Koya Vaka-uta. And, she's such a very busy lady. When she agreed to join me on my platform tonight, I was so happy. I was because I know she will be in one part of the world, that might be difficult to connect with her, but for some reason, this week she was based in Suva, so it was easy to get her connected. So from me here in California, just like to reiterate the power of stories, as Dr. Frances has just said there, the importance of our young people. Those of you who are listening in today, take the time to record the stories of your mom, your grandmother, your aunties. Now you have the technology. Yeah. You can just press record and, record the songs, record the stories, record the chant, any opportunities that you can be able to do that. And that way, we can be able to pass on those knowledges, to our future generation. So that was a wonderful reminder from Dr. Frances. Yeah? So Vinaka level from me. Tomorrow we'll be traveling over to New York. We have Amele Tamboya Tarakinikini, who will be joining us from there as well, sharing some of the projects that she has been part of, the ones that she works with her husband, Mr. Tarakinikini, Filippo, and also the work that she does on the side as a Marama ni Kandau. And again, with Dr. Frances, I'm so glad that she has some Kandau connection. I know I'm biased, but I'm just so happy to hear that. So I look forward to have a cup of coffee with her when I get back to Fiji and hear more of that part of her family. And you never know, we might be from the same province, sorry, same tikina or the same village. I hope so. So, Vinaka Vakalewa from me to all of you, and thank you for joining me and Dr. Frances. I wish you all the very best in all that you do, whether it's morning time in your part of the world or whether it's evening. I'm saying goodbye from me here in California. Loloma Vakambimbi, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Vinaka. Mwade.